Another issue why it's so important to know self-regulated learning, or also lifelong learning, we're also talking about lifelong learning, is that very few people stay in the same profession all their life nowadays. So actually, I didn't find any statistics from Saudi Arabia or Arabian countries, but maybe it's also interesting for you to see how the numbers are in Europe. So here I just brought a study by the European Commission, and they just asked people how often they changed their profession, not their job, so to go in another company or something, but really their profession. So for example, from being a teacher to being a manager at a company or something like that. So what do you think? How many of them said they never changed their job or their profession? How many said they changed their profession 1 to 5 times, 6 to 10 times? Or of course, there were also some who never were employed. So as you can't talk, I show you the results immediately. So I think it's quite interesting that more than 60% of the Europeans who were questioned in that study said that they changed their profession 1 to 5 times. So that means even if you have a very good education in your profession, it's quite probable nowadays that you will get another profession. And of course, their self-regulated learning and lifelong learning plays a very important role. And even if we stay in the same profession, there are so many new things we have to learn. For example, 30 years ago, very few people used computers. They had to learn how to computers by themselves. So lifelong learning and self-regulated learning is extremely important. And now something that's a little bit closer to school, which a lot of you are working in, I guess. Self-regulated learners in school also show much more adaptive learning behavior. I just want to show you the results of one meta-analysis. Here, for example, we see that students at school who know how to self-regulate their learning have higher achievement. So that's a correlation coefficient. So the better they are in self-regulated learning, the better their achievements at school, the better their homework quality, the more intrinsically motivated they are, and the more self-efficacy they show, and also the more learning strategies they use when learning. So you see a lot of positive relations between self-regulated learning and adaptive behavior in school. And next, I want to show you a study that a PhD student of mine and I did with several thousand primary school students in Germany. And with these children, we just asked them what kind of learning they prefer. So here on the right-hand side, you can see they either could choose self-regulated learning, so they themselves could decide what goals they want to set, what learning strategies they want to use, or they could choose externally regulated learning. For example, they could say that the teachers or their parents should tell them how to learn, or they also could use impulsive learning, like they just didn't want to think about how they learn. And we gave these 3 options in different learning situations. For example, when they prepared for a classroom test, when they prepared their homework, and so on. And what we did, we on the one hand side tried to find out what kind of learning they preferred, self-regulated learning, externally regulated learning, or impulsive learning. And on the other hand, we asked about their emotions when they learned. And here you can see the differences between the 3 groups when it comes to different emotions. So what we found was that the more students prefer self-regulated learning, the more they enjoyed their learning, the less they worried about their learning, the less anxious they were about their learning. Here there was an exception. The impulsive learners also weren't very anxious. And what also was interesting was that the more self-regulated learning students preferred, the less boredom they showed during learning. And that's quite interesting because other studies show that boredom and anxiety are very important emotions in German classrooms, at least. I'm not sure if it's the same in Saudi Arabia or Arabian countries, but there are a lot of negative emotions in German classrooms. And it's really important to know that students who prefer self-regulated learning show much more positive emotions during learning process. So maybe some of you asked yourself, what exactly do I mean by self-regulated learning? Because there are so many definitions of self-regulated learning. And so that we're all talking about the same, I just show you a definition that we use in our training programs, but also in our research. So what we use is the definition by Pintridge. It's from the Handbook of Self-Regulated Learning, and he defined self-regulated learning as an active, constructive process whereby learners set goals for their learning and then do monitor, regulate, and control their cognition, motivation, and behavior, guided and constrained by their goals and contextual features in the environment. So you see, goal setting is very important in self-regulated learning. So learners who are self-regulated learners know how to set appropriate goals, and they also guide their learning by these goals. And while they're learning, they're monitoring their own learning process. If they realize something going well during their learning process, they regulate their learning process, and they also control not only their cognition, their motivation and their behavior. So you see, it's a lot of different aspects that are important in self-regulated learning. And what we did in the beginning when we started our research, because what our goal was to develop intervention programs or training programs for regular classroom instruction. So what we did, we came up with a normative model to break down the most important aspects of self-regulated learning. So not to include everything that is meant by self-regulated learning, but to really have a normative model that we can teach to students at classrooms. And when I say teach in regular classroom, we normally begin at grade 3 and 4, but we also have training programs for university students. So it's a very similar approach. And the basis for teaching self-regulated learning to students in different age groups is our normative model of self-regulated learning. So a colleague and I, Albert Ziegler and I, we developed the model. And I'll shortly introduce the model to you because that's exactly what we teach to the students when we teach them self-regulated learning. So what we teach to the students is to, first of all, self-assess their own competencies. And we teach them to self-assessment in 2 areas. First of all, concerning learning contents. So for example, mathematics or science, but also to assess their strengths and weaknesses when it comes to their own learning behavior. So why is it so important to know one's own strengths and weaknesses? It's very important to know one's own strengths and weaknesses, because if we don't know our strengths and weaknesses, we are not able to set appropriate goals. And as you saw, goal setting is something very important in self-regulated learning. So after the students know what their strengths and weaknesses are, we teach them to set appropriate goals concerning learning contents and concerning their own learning behavior. So for example, if they realize division tasks are very difficult for them, then of course their goal should be related to that weakness, division tasks, and they should really try to learn more in that area. If they realize that there are a lot of distractions while learning, and one weakness in their learning process is that they're not able to learn without distractions, then a goal could be to really avoid distractions while learning. So you see, they not only do self-assessment about learning content and learning behavior, they also use this self-assessment to set appropriate goals concerning their own learning behavior, but also concerning learning contents. The next thing we do, we teach the students to strategically plan their learning process. That means we teach them how they can reach the goals they set. To do that, we introduce different kinds of cognitive and metacognitive learning strategies. I'll show you some examples in a minute. And we also show the students how to implement learning strategies. So for example, I'm not sure what kind of learning strategies you teach to your students. One typical strategy that's taught in German schools is underlining main ideas, for example. So if we teach a student to underline the main ideas in a text, we not only show the student how to do that, but we also teach the student to monitor the use of the learning strategy. Why do we do that? So just imagine a student has a lot of text to learn for a classroom exam, and we teach the student, if you underline the main ideas, that will reduce the amount of learning content for you. And what students normally do, what normally happens, they start to underline the main ideas in the text. However, very soon, nearly everything is underlined. So that's a problem, because then the learning strategy doesn't really help us anymore. It doesn't really reduce the learning content anymore. It's just as if I didn't use a learning strategy at all. So what we teach the students is to find out, first of all, I'm underlining too many main ideas, or I nearly underline everything. And we also teach the students to find out, why do I underline too many ideas? Is it because I don't understand a certain text? Is it because I find the text passage especially interesting? So what are the reasons why I don't use my learning strategy in a proper way? And then as soon as they know why the learning strategy doesn't work, we also teach them how to adjust their learning strategies, how to implement the learning strategy in a better way. And you see that's a little sub-cycle here, because normally it takes very long till students know one learning strategy properly. So what's often done wrongly, if we teach learning strategies to students, we just show them how a learning strategy works. We let them try a learning strategy maybe, and then we think they should be able to implement the learning strategy. However, that doesn't work. So what we know from research, it normally takes about 6 weeks of daily training with feedback till a student is able to use a very simple learning strategy properly. So something like underlining main ideas, to really implement it in classrooms in a way that students really know how to do it, we normally take several weeks of daily training with feedback. Otherwise, they just will give it up again. Maybe I'm not sure. I guess not so many people ride bikes in Saudi Arabia, I guess, because it's very warm. But in Germany, it's a big thing to learn how to ride a bike. And I think for riding a bike, it's very clear you can't just sit on a bike and you know how to do it. You have to really train it. And it's the same with learning strategies. Even if I explain very well to a student how to implement a learning strategy, that doesn't mean that the students really can do it and that it really works well. And if we don't manage to really practice the learning strategies, students will just think it's extra work and it doesn't really help me. So that's why we have that sub-cycle and why we implement the learning strategy, do the monitoring again and again, based on real learning tasks in our training programs. And then at the end of that cycle, there's an outcome evaluation. So we also teach the students to evaluate how well their learning process has worked. So for example, we discuss with the students how their self-assessment worked out. So did they overestimate their strength or underestimate them? Did they find the right weaknesses, or did they set goals that weren't really appropriate? Did they use appropriate learning strategies? Did they implement the learning strategies in a proper way? And when they implemented it, did they really monitor their learning behavior to find out if it really worked? Did they adjust it, and so on? So you see, that's why it is called a cyclical model of self-regulated learning, because every step is trained together with the students for several weeks. Because we know if we don't do that, if we just tell them how to learn, that won't work. It won't improve their learning behavior. So I think we can't have any questions in between, Abdullah, right? You're on mute, I think.
Yeah, there's a note here asking, Al-Banin is asking, would you please repair the research regarding 6 weeks for implementing strategies?
Yeah, at the end, I have a list of references. It's included there. So we also did some studies on that, and I have the publication list in the end. Yeah. Are there any more questions?
Yeah, so far we ask people to keep their questions to the end, actually.
Okay. Just wasn't sure if there are questions of understanding, because that cycle is actually used for our training programs as well. So,
yeah. So any question for the audience, they could write it in the note, and I could share it with you when I have it. Okay.
Okay. So do I have to let people in, or can you do that, Abdullah? Because it shows
we do that. Actually, we do that.
You can do that. Okay. Yeah. Good. Okay. So that's a cycle of self-regulated learning, a normative cycle, as I said. So that's what we are using when we're doing intervention programs in regular classrooms. And of course, it's done in a very easy way for children. I'll show you some examples later on. So now you know what we mean by self-regulated learning when we're doing research and training programs. And maybe some of you ask yourself, is it really important for gifted students? So here I would say, of course, it's as important for gifted students as for other students, because for them, we also find the same positive effects when it comes to motivation, to achievements, and so on. And what might be interesting for you, gifted students do not choose self-regulated learning more often than averagely gifted students. So in one of our studies, again, with a lot of students, several thousand students, actually, we just looked at average students here that was based on IQ actually, and gifted students. And what we found was if they had the choice between self-regulated learning, externally regulated learning, so their parents, their teachers tell them what kind of goals to set, how to plan their learning, and so on, or impulsive learning, the self-regulated learning was not chosen more often by gifted students. So here, for example, for outcome monitoring, you even see gifted students chose self-regulated learning much less than average students, and the same came true for strategy monitoring. It's not only our studies that show this. There are also a lot of other studies from the US, for example, where we find that normally gifted learners, they are aware that self-regulated learning, metacognitive strategies are important. However, if they're not in challenging learning situations, they normally don't use it more often. And without training programs, they're also not automatically able to use self-regulated learning in a better way than averagely gifted students. So that shows it's really important to also teach self-regulated learning to gifted learners. That's one thing, so they don't use it more often and they're not automatically more capable of using self-regulated learning. Another issue, of course, is if gifted learners really want to become outstanding in a talent domain, then self-regulated learning, that's SRL actually, becomes more and more important. I guess most of you know the studies by Erickson and his colleagues that in very many talent domains, about 10,000 hours of deliberate practice are necessary before achievement excellence can be reached. And deliberate practice normally means it's a very intense kind of learning where you set goals that are always a little bit above your achievement level, above your actual achievement level. And that kind of learning is best done if you have real good mentors or coaches. However, of course, 10,000 hours can never be accompanied by mentors or very good teachers. So if somebody really wants to become outstanding in a talent domain, there are always very long learning times without a teacher, without another person. And here, self-regulated learning is essential to know what kind of goals to set, what kind of learning strategies to use, how to find out what's working when I implement a learning strategy and what's not working when I implement a learning strategy. And a last point, from all what we know about self-regulated learning, it might be also very helpful for gifted underachievers. If you think back, we found out that students who self-regulate their learning have more positive emotions, have more positive motivation, have more self-confidence, and so on. So these are all areas that are also able to explain underachievement or to predict underachievement. And of course, the idea comes that self-regulated learning might also be a good measure to support gifted underachievers. And I will show some of our studies, or at least list some of our studies, where we also could show that training programs on self-regulated learning are effective for underachieving gifted students. So now, of course, the teachers among you are probably most interested how self-regulated learning can be taught in regular classrooms. And I think it's quite interesting because there are by now some meta-analysis that show that there are a lot of training programs, if they're implemented by researchers, they we find quite high effect sizes. However, if teachers implement the training programs, the effect sizes are much lower. And our goal in our team was to really develop training programs that are not only working if researchers implement them in the classrooms, but that can be implemented by teachers in their regular classrooms during regular classroom instruction, and where you can also work on learning contents, so curricular learning contents, without losing time because you're only focusing on learning strategies. And normally, if we teach these kind of training programs to our teachers, it takes several days. So I'm very sorry that I can just give you a short idea how it's working, but I hope I at least can give you some ideas what we are doing. So maybe first of all, some basic principles of our training programs. So the first thing is we convey declarative, procedural, and conditional knowledge about learning strategies. So probably a lot of you haven't heard the words. It's not a problem. I will explain what's meant by the three words or by the three terms. So with declarative knowledge, we mean factual knowledge. So for example, you could have the idea that a certain learning strategy is really helpful. And you could tell your students, listen, there's a learning strategy, let's say underlining main ideas, and this learning strategy really will help you to learn more quickly and to achieve better results at school. So that's declarative knowledge. You will just tell the student how the learning strategy works. So you will tell the student, okay, read the text, and everything that's a main idea that's especially important in that text and that you should learn when you learn for your classroom exam should be underlined. That would be giving declarative knowledge to a student. And of course, it can be helpful for a student to know, okay, underlining main ideas is important, and how does underlining main ideas work. So that's an important information. However, normally students will not be able to really implement a learning strategy in a proper way. So the students, as before I told you, they probably will start with the main ideas, and after a while they will just underline things that are not really main ideas or underline everything, so it doesn't really work. That's why we also need procedural knowledge. That's why we also have to practice to use the learning strategy. So procedural knowledge means we practice how to implement a learning strategy. That would mean it's not enough just to explain how to underline main ideas. It would mean I also give some texts to the student, let him or her underline the main ideas, have a look if it's really only the main ideas that are underlined. And if it's not only the main ideas, I try to find out what's going wrong, why it's not working. I will explain that to the student. We'll give him another text the next day, maybe. He or she will try the same learning strategy again. I will have another look as a teacher, will find out, is it really only the main ideas, or is a lot underlined, or did the student underline everything that he didn't understand or she didn't understand? And we do that for a long period of time till the students really know how to implement a learning strategy properly, correctly. So that's procedural knowledge. Declarative knowledge is to tell them how a strategy works. Procedural knowledge is to practice the learning strategy, to give feedback till the student really knows how to implement the learning strategy. And conditional knowledge is to also teach the students what kind of learning strategy works for what kind of learning content, because not every learning strategy works for every content. So that's the three very important areas that we teach in our training programs. And I think now you get a slight idea why it's so important to take several weeks to train such learning strategies, because especially the procedural knowledge to try out the learning strategy, to find out what's not working, to give feedback to the student, to improve the learning strategy, that really takes several weeks, even for these basic learning strategies. The next important issue is to show students that their learning behavior is connected to their performance. A big problem, at least in German classrooms, is that students have an idea that learning strategies really can help them to become better. However, normally they don't know how to implement the learning strategy correctly. And that means they invest a lot of time in, for example, underlining main ideas, but then after going into the classroom exam, their grade maybe didn't really change a lot. So what is important, we have to show the students, if you invest more effort and learn how to use learning strategies, that also will improve your performance. And it's not enough to show them they get better grades, because that the feedback is too far away for them. That's why in our learning strategy trainings, we have daily feedback. So we always draw connections. If a student used the learning strategies in a correct way, they can find out they also had better solution rates in their exercise sheets, for example. So they really use learning material and get feedback. If their learning strategies is implemented correctly, their achievements are better. And another very important issue is we also should make sure that the students are able to improve their performance. So if they use a learning strategy, they also can become better. And that's especially important for gifted students. I don't know how it is in Arabian countries, but especially for the younger students in Germany, if they're gifted, they don't really have to learn to get a good grade. They just know how to do it. They just get the best grade. And that's a big, big problem, of course, because if I don't have to learn, but always have the best grade, I won't see the necessity to use learning strategies. So if we want to teach learning strategies to gifted students, we have to make sure that we have very challenging tasks so that they also see the necessity to use learning strategies. Otherwise, it's just effort and it doesn't make sense to them. And that's actually the big, big problem in many cases in intervention studies, that the tasks are just too easy and that gifted learners don't see the necessity of using learning strategies. Another issue, and that's more a practical issue, but also an issue to show students it's really helpful, is that self-regulated learning should always be taught during regular classroom and homework. First of all, because otherwise we won't be able to really work on learning contents during the regular classroom, so we can give some of the aspects into homework. On the other hand, for the students, it's also important to see, okay, self-regulated learning is not something that's just done in school or just in math or in Arabic language or something like that. It's done in many learning settings and in many subjects. So that's very important. And what's also very important, that interventions on self-regulated learning should always combine specific subject areas or subject contents. So for example, mathematics or science, and specific learning strategies. If students just are taught that learning strategies are important, but they don't use it in their daily classroom contexts and with their subject contents, they won't really see the value. That's one thing. The other thing is you as a teacher won't be able to really teach any content to your students if you just talk about learning strategies. So that's why we always practice the learning strategies in our intervention programs based on specific learning contents. So just to give you an example, we always combine a certain kind of learning strategy and a certain kind of learning content. For example, we have a training program on homework behavior. So like, for example, avoiding distraction, time management, and things like that. And we do that in mathematics classrooms. And the students get homeworks in mathematics, and during working on these mathematics homeworks, they also learn how to implement the homework strategies. Or when we introduce text reduction strategies, like, for example, underlining main ideas, we do that in science classrooms. And the students get science texts every day. And in these science texts, they use text reduction strategies every day in a text, and then get feedback if it's working well, and so on. We also have other training programs like basic reading strategies and German language learning, or writing strategies and language instruction. Or we also did a training on time management in information technology. So that was for grade 12, so the high school, and also for university level. So you see, very similar training programs can be done in different age groups. And it can be done in different subjects and for different learning strategies. So if you think back about the 7-step cycle, I showed you on step 4, there's always a certain kind of learning strategy that we're implementing. How do we do that in practice? So what we're normally doing is we have a teacher training. It's normally 2 to 3 full days. So full days in Germany means 8-hour days. So you can see it's 16 to 24 hours of teacher training in which we teach the learning contents to the teachers, but we also give them all the material, all the exercise sheets for the students. We discuss how they can implement it in their regular classrooms and so on. After these 2 to 3 full days, the teachers implement the intervention during their regular classroom instruction and during homework. And every training module lasts 7 weeks, and the teachers are doing the training program on a daily basis within a certain subject, for example, mathematics or science. After a while, so normally after the first 3 weeks, we have another teacher training where we discuss what's working well with the students, what's not working so well, and how they can change their approaches if necessary. And then we're also evaluating the training program, and we give feedback to the teachers. So we also show them how much the motivation of their students improved, if they really improved their learning behavior, if their achievements are better after several weeks, and so on. And I unfortunately don't have so much time, but just to give you a little idea how it's done, I chose one of our training modules. It's a self-regulated learning training on text reduction strategies. in the subject of science. So it's basic science, and we did that training program in primary school. So in the 4th grade, the students are about 9 years old. So what we do, or what the teachers actually do after they participated in our training, in the first week, every day they talk about reading and text reduction strategies with their students. So for example, they discuss with their students why it is important to find main ideas in texts. So for example, they tell or they discuss with the students if they have to prepare for a classroom test and they have a lot of learning material and they don't have enough time to learn everything. It's very important to identify the most important aspects in the texts and then only repeat the most important aspects. That's why it's important to find main ideas, for example. Then the teachers also introduce different kinds of text reduction strategies. So one text reduction strategy I already talked about, underlining main ideas. Another text reduction strategy would be creating mind maps. I'm not sure if you know what I mean by mind maps. It would be, I do kind of a figure with the most important ideas of a text, and I do a hierarchical figure. There's the main idea, and to that main idea, there are 4 important ideas that belong to that main idea, and so on. So they do kind of a figure where they order the main ideas hierarchically. Or, of course, they also could just write a summary, so a shorter version of the texts they have to learn. So these would be 3 different kinds of text reduction strategies that are taught to the students. And during that first week, it's really only about declarative knowledge. So the teachers really just introduce the text reduction strategies, tell the students what they mean by these text reduction strategies, and they give the students some text so they can try it out. So they just try it. The second week is the self-regulated learning week. During the second week, the teachers introduce the cycle to their students. So here you see a picture of one of the classrooms. What the teachers do, they talk about every step. Every day they introduce one step of the cycle. For example, one day they talk about self-assessment. Why is it important to know my own strengths and weaknesses when it comes to learning? Do I really know my strengths or weaknesses, or can't I really tell what I already can do well and what I can't do so well? And why is it important to know that? The next day, they will talk about goal setting. What are goals? Why is it important to set goals for my learning? The day after, they will introduce learning strategies. So in our case, and here you see the red box around the strategy implementation, here they will only talk about text reduction strategies. So here they really will talk about what kind of text reduction strategies exist and so on. And they do some exercises with the students just to try the different learning steps of the learning cycle out. So the first 2 weeks, as you see, it's only about introducing strategies. It's only about declarative knowledge. In weeks 3 to 7, they proceduralize every step of the cycle. So they really practice it. They get material from us where they really can find out what they already can do well when it comes to identifying main ideas, what are their strengths and weaknesses when it comes to text reduction strategies, and they document all that in a learning diary, and they also have materials to really practice the learning strategies. Just one example to practice the underlining of the main ideas, they get a science text every day, and every science text includes 10 main ideas. And what they do, they try to identify the 10 main ideas. They underline the 10 main ideas, sorry. My English, I lose my English in the evening. So they underline the 10 main ideas, and the day after they do that at homework, and the next day in school, they have a look if they really found the right main ideas or if they underlined something that is not really a main idea. And that's a big discussion in the classroom, of course, because most students are not able to really find main ideas without any training, without any feedback. So the teachers really have 4 or 5 weeks of time to practice underlining main ideas, drawing mind maps, summarizing texts. They can together find out what works well, what are problems. They can give feedback, and the next day they get a very similar text, same length, again, 10 main ideas, and they will try it out again. And what we also do, we give feedback to the students to show them, okay, the first day you only found 2 main ideas, or you only identified 2 main ideas correctly. But over the weeks, you managed to find more and more main ideas. So they also get feedback how much their learning strategies improve. And they also discuss with their classmates and the teachers how to improve the use of learning strategies. And exactly the same is done for setting goals. So how do I set an appropriate goal when it comes to my learning? How do I correctly assess my strengths and weaknesses and so on? So it's quite a complicated process, but it's doable. Actually, it's already doable in grade 3. We even have teachers who started to do it in grade 3. It's of course very different in grade 3 than with university students, but the basic idea is very similar. We always show them what self-regulated learning means, what kind of steps are important when it comes to self-regulated learning. And we always develop training materials that they can use to proceduralize all these steps, so to really practice the steps based on real learning contents, on curricular learning contents. And we also use learning diaries that the teachers can use to discuss strengths and weaknesses, and that they also can use to give feedback. I know it's a little bit abstract still, but I didn't get 3 days from Abdullah. I only got 45 minutes. I hope you got an idea. We can discuss it in more detail.
By the way, Ahud Al-Qahtani here used this model in her dissertation.
Oh, great. Great. Maybe she can tell me a little bit how it worked and what her experiences were. Good. And because my 45 minutes, I think, are nearly gone or already gone.
Yes.
Can I still talk a little bit about?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Because I heard there are also some researchers. So maybe just some really basic things about the evaluation. First of all, it's a lot of effort for the teachers. So all teachers in the presentation probably thought, oh my gosh, 7 weeks, how do I do that? It's a lot of work. I have to get 3 days of training and so on. So for us as researchers, that means it really has to work. If it doesn't work, it's not worth the effort. So when is it worth the effort of our teachers? First of all, the minimum for us would be that self-regulated learning, achievements, and so on should increase. So students should be better after the training than before the training. So we should have an increase of several things: motivation, learning behavior, achievements, and so on. That's a minimum. However, I would say I'm still not happy with the training if it's only showing that result. Another very important thing for us is that it not goes back immediately after the training. So we also want the effects to stay. That's why we also do follow-up studies several months after our training programs. And that's not easy to do because often we have quite good results, but after some months, it's already back to the level where we started. So that's one thing, we want to have long-term effects. However, still, I would say it's not really sure that the training program works if we have results like that. We only can be sure that it's our training and not just a great general classroom instruction if we compare a lot of classrooms where we did the trainings with a lot of classrooms with regular instruction. So all the effort will only be worth it if our training programs show better achievements, learning behavior, and so on than regular classroom instruction. So that's why we normally compare about 60 classrooms with training with 60 classrooms without training. And what's also very important, we need teachers who also want to participate in the training, but only can participate later on. So the regular classroom instruction teachers normally get the training after a while, because why is that important? Otherwise, we might just have all the very motivated, very good teachers in our training program, and the ones who are not so motivated won't apply for our training program. So we normally have waiting list groups of teachers who do the training after a while. And then what ideally also exists is a kind of placebo group. You know that from medicine, it's a group that gets something, but not really a self-regulated learning training, because we also know from research, whatever we do in a classroom, we always have slight increases of motivation, and that also might influence achievements and so on. So if we don't have a group that gets something, but not the same kind of training, we're not sure if it's just a novelty effect or if it's really our training program that is working. So that's more for the researchers among us. We can discuss that in a minute, a little bit more in detail, I think. But I also wanted to show you what are our standards before we really give out the training programs by the ministry, by the administration, the school administration. And what we found for our training programs that are published by now is that we really find these positive effects when it comes to achievements. So for example, if we do a math training, then we have an increase in math achievement. If we do a text understanding training, we have increases in text comprehension. We also have these increases in learning behavior, and interestingly in motivation also. It's not a motivation training. And we also have positive developments in achievement motivation. So for example, students enjoy learning more if they really implement the trainings well. What we also did is we had a very close look if all students profit from the training. So we had classrooms with gifted students, but also students with very low IQs. And what we also found for our training programs, that they worked for students independent of their cognitive abilities. So it also worked for gifted learners. However, as I already said, we had very special tasks that were difficult enough for gifted learners. And we also evaluated some of our trainings, especially the ones where we had several thousand students who participated in the training programs, because there we also had enough students to identify some gifted underachievers. And there we also found positive results. So also the gifted underachievers profited from the training programs. So here's some of our studies on self-regulated learning. If you go in ResearchGate, a lot of them are online. You can just download them, or if they're not online, I'm happy to send them to you. And that's my presentation. I know I was a little bit too long, sorry for that, but I hope we still have some time for questions.
Thank you very much, Haider, for this wonderful presentation and fascinating outcomes. Actually, we learned a lot tonight. It's a very rich dinner for us. I think it's a very heavy dinner for us. It's a knowledge dinner, not food. But I think we are all learned a lot about self-regulated learning tonight. We learned a lot about how to use it. And of course, we need to read more if we need to expand our understanding of this strategy and its implementations. Now I move to Malak to facilitate the questions.
Yes, another time for questions. I'll take first the direct questions from those raising their hands, then move on to questions on the chat. Let's start with Al-Banin. Yes, can you please?
Yes, Assalamu alaikum. Hi, Professor. How are you? Thank you for your very useful presentation. As a specialist for gifted and talented, my question is that during the corona pandemic, self-regulated strategies are becoming very, very important. Looking from another angle, what characteristics we should look for in our gifted students if we want to invest self-regulated strategies among them? Is it some sort of motivation, self-motivated students, or we shall look for autonomy? Do you have any recommendation for us?
I mean, I think that brings us very much into the discussion about what gifted learners are. I think still often we use intelligence or creativity or motivation. Of course, we could also include learning behavior. So if we would define a gifted learner as a student who, with a high probability, will later on achieve excellence, so that could be a definition, of course. That would also mean it should be a student who has excellent learning behavior. However, that doesn't mean it has already been there. It can also be taught, of course. So I think if we use that malleable approach, then probably it's most important that we find students who are motivated to improve their learning and to work on their learning behavior. And that also might be a problem often in gifted education, because for a long time, gifted students really don't need learning strategies, don't need self-regulated learning, because it's just so easy for them. And I think it's really important to find the point in time when they really would need learning strategies, and to show them that it's important and why it's important, and also teach it to them. Does that kind of respond to your question, or?
Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, as we always tell our students, the gifted are the laziest students, because they don't put any effort, they just get everything they want. That's why when we start self-learning strategies, they withdraw so quickly from the program.
Yeah, and I mean, that's exactly. It's actually a problem how we identify students, because there's always a certain point in time, independent how intelligent they are, how great they are, if they really want to become excellent in the talent domain, they always will need learning strategies and good learning behavior. Otherwise, they won't be gifted anymore after a while, if we define gifted by high achieving, for example.
Yes. Thank you. Let's now, yes, Nader, please.
Assalamu alaikum. Should we say our question in Arabic and English, or just in English? That's okay.
You can say it in English. I think there's a translation.
Do you need me to say my only English, huh? تمام.
Okay.
مرحبا بالجميع. شكرا دكتور عبد الله على هذه الاستضافة. Okay, تمام. Thank you, Joel. Dr. Abdullah is a very great pioneer in our area of gifted and talented. I need to go back in 2013. 2013 to say for you, my professor, that I send you an email, and you were very generous that you send me all what you have from German regarding my research was in self-regulated learning. And I need to thank you because you were very generous and you sent me all what you have regarding Germany, what happened there regarding learning. And this is an opportunity to thank you for that. I'm not that I send you in, and you're ready to say it honestly. And I had opportunity in this time to say thank you back for what you did for me in that time. And one point here, my study, I found that there is no differences like what you found. There is no differences between gifted students and regular students regarding self-regulated learning. And this is what Dr. Abdullah found in his research also. I remember when he discussed me, we didn't find any in his research and my research. There was no differences between the gifted students and the regular students regarding self-regulated learning. And what I explained, how I explained at that time, that maybe we are targeting students in schools, and they are not imminent. They have been for being gifted. They are not just gifted now. They have like IQ tests, by creative tests. They have indication to be gifted, but they're not imminent. They are not achiever because they are still in schools. Maybe if we apply self-regulated learning for the achiever who achieve something in their life as a gifted, real gifted in our really life experience, maybe we'll find differences. I explain it in this way, like the students, they have indication to be a gifted, but they are not gifted, really gifted. They have indication. Therefore, it's difficult to find the differences among the regular students and the gifted students. This was one of the comments that I found in that time. Mm-hmm. Second point, I like to be quick. Second point, maybe we use the self-regulated learning concepts, and educators use like self-studies skills, or the 21st century skills. Maybe people using the same, actually, the content, but with different concepts. Like what you mentioned, underlining the main ideas, mind mapping. These things, they use it here in our context, but they use it under different titles, like self-studies skills or self-learning skills, or learning for learning, okay, or learning skills, but in different content. It's the same concepts by different content. Therefore, some people confuse, or they don't see the new in this. The third point, and I like to end with that, I didn't find the point of regulated. I mean, the most important thing is related. How can I regulate my learning? And what you mentioned was the person regulate himself, especially what she mentioned, the lady before me asked question. She said that nowadays in this pandemic, or for new generation, they need to be a self-learner, like you mentioned also in the beginning. But where's part of how can they be independent in their way of learning? Details, but how they probably home and with their friends, how can they transfer these, become as a part of their habits? This is the challenging, I think. This is a challenging of this, the part of regulated. How can they regulate it in their daily experience? I end with that, and thank you for all what you hear. appreciate what you say. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm very glad you could use the material I sent to you, and it's great to learn that you're still working on self-regulated learning in your research. So maybe I start with the studies you did, and which are quite similar to our results. I also think that it's very much depending on the learning contents and on the learning environment. There are very few studies that really look at gifted classrooms and self-regulated learning. And there are some results from the US that show that as soon as learning environments are more challenging, gifted students also start to use learning strategies more often, so self-regulated learning strategies more often. However, they're not able to implement them in a better way than other students. So I completely agree with you that probably in most of our classrooms, they just don't see the necessity to use learning strategies. And then to self-regulated learning, and you said it's learning how to learn, I think it's called in your countries. Maybe I have to go back a little bit to my definition and to the model. So I think the big areas in that model are, first of all, cognitive learning strategies. So I focused very much on these strategies like underlining main ideas, but then there are also the metacognitive learning strategies, and that's really about regulating the learning. So not only how to set goals, but also to regulate one's own learning process, and that would be I called it monitoring what works well, what doesn't work so well, and adjusting, but that adjustment would be the regulating of the learning probably. So these metacognitive strategies are more the regulation strategies, not the cognitive learning strategies, which I focused a little bit more on because I thought that's a little bit more tangible for people who really work in schools. And for the transfer, you're absolutely right. Even if they do several of our training modules, it's very difficult to transfer that self-regulated learning approach to everyday life. So it's a really, really long process. And there's also a lot of research how difficult it is to get that kind of transfer. So what we try to do in Germany is we try to combine a lot of these training modules. So let's say we start in mathematics and we do a similar module in science, in German language class, and so on. So the students really learn. It's a common thing to do it in school. Then the teachers also discuss, how can I use it when I play a music instrument? How can I use it when I play soccer, and so on? So it's a real school development process where step by step they try to implement it to whatever field of learning, but also to everyday life. So let's say in Germany, a lot of students have pets like hamsters or whatever. Can I use that kind of approach when I look after my hamster? So things like that for the smaller ones. So they really try to make it a common thing for whatever the students do. And of course, you can use it for soccer or you can use it for music or whatever. So, but the important thing is that they have to learn it in a very narrow domain. And it's, of course, very much externally regulated in the beginning before they really can do it themselves and before it's real self-regulated learning. So does that go a little bit into the direction you?
Yeah, just comment. Like the slide that you show us regarding the 1,000 hours, it's need a lot of a practice. That means
yes,
we need a lot of a practice to get it as a skills. It's not just like a training in 6 weeks or 7 weeks. It's a lot of efforts to have it as a habits, to
definitely
change it as a habits. It needs a lot of practice actually, and working in many contexts, and especially like what you said, the hamster, the students need to have examples in their daily life when they can they can't transfer the skills if they don't practice it in their daily life, to become a habit, part of their routine, become a routine for self-regulated learning. This is my comments. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your explanation. I hope that we see you one time here in Bahrain or in Saudi, or we can see you there in Germany. Thank you, Dr. Abdullah, for this opportunity. All the times you are really the man that you're giving us opportunity to meet.
Thank you, Dr. Nader.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Abdullah. I appreciate what you do.
Thank you. The next question from Nadia, she said, would you please explain if there were any research findings, whether finding the main idea was more difficult to underachievers and cognitive differences students than to regular students?
Mm-hmm. Actually, what we found is that students with lower cognitive abilities and underachievers started with fewer main ideas at the beginning of the training, but that the increase was the same. So let's say whereas highly intelligent student or a high achieving student started with 8 main ideas in the first week, and then in the end had 10 correct main ideas in the texts. The students with low cognitive abilities, let's say, started with 2 correct main ideas, or also the underachievers, but then they improved quicker. So for example, they found 4 or 5 at the end of the training program. And that's actually what's more important. It's not the most important that they can identify all the main ideas immediately, but that they really improve in their learning strategies. And that's what we found for all the students, independent of cognitive abilities or achievement level, that they had an improvement that was caused by the training program.
Thank you. Any more questions?
I think Maher, Said Maher al-Bashir, he has a question, but he sent it directly to me. So Maher, تفضل ماهر إذا تطرح سؤالك مباشرة. ماهر البشير. طيب ممكن نرجع له بعد شوي. في علي الحسين.
السلام عليكم.
ما يسمح لك طوف
Yes.
تفضل علي.
السلام عليكم، شكرا جزيلا على هذه الاستضافة وهذا اللقاء الجميل. Doctor, also I would like to thank you for this important presentation. Then also I would like to thank Dr. Nader, who is one of the inspires in Bahrain Teacher College. He is my teacher, if he remember me. My question is, as a teacher for cycle 1, I mean grade 1, 2, 3, what is the characteristics that means my students is talent?
Well, that is really a difficult question, and maybe you know all the discussions and all the different conceptions of giftedness. So if you bring together 100 giftedness researchers, you probably have 100 different opinions. So what we really often use in our research group and also in the research group of Albert Ziegler is a Delphi definition. We would call it a Delphi definition, and we would say a gifted student is a student who, with a high probability, will later on reach high achievements or excellence. And if that's your definition, of course, you have to look at a lot of different aspects within the student, but also within the environment of the student. So, for example, within the student, it's of course something like intelligence. It's something like motivation. If a student is very intelligent but isn't motivated at all, he probably, if you accept that definition, I mean, you can also reject it, but if you accept the definition, then you would say, even if a student is very intelligent but isn't motivated at all, he or she will never reach excellence. Or other things like regulation of emotions, learning strategies, and so on. So there are a lot of individual aspects within the students that are important when it comes to developing excellence. It doesn't mean the student already needs to have it, but at least the students need to be able to develop it so that high achievements are probable later on. It also means the student needs an environment that enables him or her to really achieve excellence later on. For example, we would call it cultural capital. If the parents, peers, or so friends around the students don't value education and learning at all, it's very improbable that the students will really become great in the talent domain. It's an infrastructural capital. So does the student have access to learning materials, to libraries, whatever? And when I say all these aspects are important, I don't say they're fixed. Of course, you can change it, you can influence it, you can try to make people around the student value education more, to give the students opportunity to go to libraries and so on. But in our view, it would be a real interaction of individual and environmental aspects that have to come together to enable increase the probability for a student to really become good in a field. It's very in a nutshell, but do you get the basic idea?
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, thank you.
I think it's just much more complicated than that we sometimes would wish it to be. But I think Dr. Nasser said it quite nicely. So in 8 years, I think we met 8 years ago, right? So in 8 years, we will meet again, and we still will say we need another 25 years to really learn how to, how something works, how self-regulated learning works best.
Okay, thank you. The next question from Najah. What is your point of view on the education through Montessori method?
I didn't get the.
She asked about Montessori method. What is your point of view?
Montessori. Okay. Mm-hmm. Actually, I don't know a lot of studies about the Montessori's approach. I know it can work quite well for students with learning difficulties as well. But I don't really know any thorough research about it. So I could just give a guess or my impression. I think there are some aspects that are quite positive. For example, if students have difficulties to understand certain concepts in mathematics because it's very much related to haptics and to visual aspects. So that could work very well to really teach the concepts. And what also might be interesting, because we also have quite a big research team in my chair who does research on fine motor skills and learning. And especially that's an important aspect when it comes to Montessori, that it's really a lot working with the hands and with the fingers. And what we, but also other researchers found is that there are close relations between fine motor skills and later mathematics achievement and later reading and writing achievements. So it could be that there are some neurological aspects using your fingers that also help you later on to improve your mathematical abilities and your reading and writing abilities. So, but I don't know studies on that, but it's a guess. So I think it could be quite good.
Okay, thank you. There is a question from Maher. He said he has some technical issue, so he sent his question for me. Mm-hmm. What are the methods what are the methods used with your German students to ensure that students are serious about arranging their work and their time outside school time, especially for those who are talented and have high intelligence scores? Or you just follow the daily and weekly tasks?
Mm-hmm. So actually we did studies in different school types. I'm not sure if you are aware of the German school system. We have, at least in the federal state where I live, we have a tracking system. So it's a high achiever, average achiever, and the low achiever track. And for the low achiever track, if you do studies in the low achiever track, the homework is normally done at school. So it's not during regular classroom instruction, but at school. So the teachers know quite well what's going on. However, of course, we don't have a lot of gifted students in lower achiever track. In a high achiever track or in primary school, here we really would look at the daily homework. So to find out if they really did the homework. We also would look at the homework quality. And we also would look at the daily achievements in their homework. So it's not a direct observation, of course, so nobody sits next to the students, but of course, by looking at their learning diaries, by looking at their homework sheets, we would know, did they do it and how well did they do it? And they also have that feedback every day, how much tasks they solved correctly. We have another problem, especially for the very good students. A lot of parents in Germany are at home, or at least especially mothers very often are at home. So they help their students or their children with the homework. And we more have a problem to control parents not to help too much. So it's not such a big problem that the students don't do their homework. It's more the problem that the parents might really do the homework for them. And to avoid that, we invite the parents before we start the training programs. We explain to the parents why it's important that the students really do their homeworks by themselves, because otherwise they can't improve their learning behavior, and that really helps. So it's more really working with the parents instead of being afraid that the students won't do it. So it's a very common thing in Germany that students have to do homeworks for several hours in the afternoon.
Thank you.
I think the time is over, Malak.
Yes. And there is no other question. ما في أسئلة. ما أدري يعني الحين الساعة 10:30.
أظن نختم الآن أحسن.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Heidrun Stuger, for this wonderful presentation. Thank you for sharing your research experience and knowledge with us. We are all learned a lot from you tonight. Thank you very much for the time that you spent and spared for us tonight. I know you are very busy with your projects, with your students, with your nationwide projects, international projects, and other presentations you are requested from other people from all over the world. So we very appreciate the time that you spent with us and the knowledge you shared with us. So thank you very much again, and thank you for all participants who participated and attended this session. Thanks again for Malak and for بالموهبة نرتقي. Thank you very much for Mr. Hisham, who translated this presentation. I hope we can meet you again in Saudi Arabia, Heidrun. soon.
I hope so.
Yeah, but in the winter, not these days. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm too weak for Saudi Arabian summer, I think.
Have a good night and see you in other event soon, inshallah ta'ala.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me, and it was great to see some of you again, and I hope to see you in one place, hopefully soon, without the pandemic. And enjoy your dinner.
Yeah, thank you.
So thanks for all who also helped with the presentation.
Thank you very much. Okay, have a good night to all. في أمان الله.
Bye.
نراكم على خير إن شاء الله جميعا.